Hi everyone, it's Paul from This Design That. Today I'm going to review the Canon IPF605 A1 printer. You may be wondering why I've chosen to review a 10-year-old printer, but there is a reason why it's still a great purchase today. So if you're a DIY screen printer, then you'll know that getting large positives printed can be quite expensive. In London, you can expect to pay around £10 to £20 for an A1 positive. It's not really a problem if you are maybe a small scale t-shirt printer when you're only printing small graphics on the chest, but if you are maybe a poster printer, you're printing kind of large artwork like you kind of see behind me here, or if you want to print a large art piece on a t-shirt, often the consumer A3 printers that are commonly available, they just don't print big enough. So if you've got a big design you want to print, and if you've got a multi-coloured job, getting 4 or 5 positives printed, when you work out the cost, £10 to £20 per positive, it can quickly add up, and it can be really, really expensive, and it can be almost the most expensive part of a screen printing project. If you only ever want to print up to a max size of A3, then the two printers I would recommend are the Epson 1400. They're a little bit harder to come by now, but there are other Epson A3 printers which do a very, very similar job. And then the Canon Pro 100, that is the A3 printer that I've got. And I've been using that for the last few years to print all of my smaller positives, and it does a really, really good job. But I came across the same predicament that I've just been talking about, in that I wanted to print something a little bit bigger. Maybe in the future I want to do as big as A1 posters. And therefore I wanted to try and find a cheaper way of being able to print A1 or A2 positives. Now, firsthand, A2 and A1 printers are very, very expensive. They're kind of out of the budget range for most DIY screen printers, in my opinion. I mean, you look at the Epson, the A2 printers, like the 4900, you can expect to pay close to 4 figures for that. And any A1 printer in the Epson range, the Sure Color range, you're talking about thousands of dollars. So it's not really a realistic purchase, in my opinion. But of course, thankfully, we have sites like eBay, and the second-hand market for these type of printers is actually quite good, and you can get some really, really good bargains. If you go onto eBay, you'll probably see a lot of Epson printers. Now, I was turned off of buying an Epson printer, an A1 printer that is, just from reading so many horror stories online. So you will hear often of people complaining about the printheads getting clogged, and this is a huge problem with Epson printers. And the problem is that to replace a printhead, you can expect to pay, I think it's about $500, $600 to get a new one. In some cases, it's just cheaper just to buy a new printer in that case. And you'll see videos on YouTube of people literally destroying their printers because it's just not worth actually buying a new printhead for the printer. It works out cheaper to just get a new Epson printer. So I wanted to stay away from Epson printers. It really seems that for the professional range, A1 printers, they are typically designed for print shops. A1 printers are not really designed and sold for consumers like me who are just doing this, in their spare time. And so you'll find that you really need to be running a lot of prints through these A1 printers to keep the ink flowing and to make sure that the print heads don't get clogged. Now, for me, I print probably 1 or 2 times a month, so using an A1 printer is not going to be something I'm going to be using every single day if I purchased it. So it was at this point I kind of almost gave up. I realised that I'm not going to be printing that much. I really don't want to be spending close to 4 figures on a printer for it to just get clogged in a week's time and it be unusable. But I did hear that Canon printers generally clog less. My experience of Canon printers has been really, really good. I had the Canon Pro 100, I bought it in my first year of university, which is nearly 5 years ago now. When I moved house into the house that I'm at now, I had it put away in storage and I didn't use it for almost a year. Last year when I moved in, I got it set up, it printed without any problems. And I have never experienced a clog on the Canon Pro 100. Now, to be fair, it's a different machine compared to the A1 printers. The print heads are much, much different on an A1 printer compared to a smaller A3 printer. My general experience with Canon has been pretty good. So therefore I started to look for a Canon A1 printer. When I was searching around on eBay, I saw that older Canon printers did get listed quite a lot, and I saw that the IPF605 was listed quite a lot. So I started doing some research, and it turns out that it's actually quite of a well-renowned workhorse of a printer, and many people are still actually using it in their print shops today, and it's getting on for like 10 years now, this printer. So that did give me some reassurance that maybe I could get away with using kind of a 10-year-old printer to print my A1 positives. Now, as I said earlier in the video, people almost throw these printers away, these big A1 printers, because most people on eBay, in their houses, they're not looking for an A1 printer. There is a much smaller market for these printers, and if something does go wrong with them, or if they want to upgrade to a new machine, oftentimes you'll see them going for really, really cheap, or they'll just be dumping them. Now, I was really, really lucky, and I managed to bag one on eBay for £60, which is about $85. Another thing that will work in your favour with trying to find a second-hand printer this size is that usually you need to do cash on collection. Usually they won't be delivered for you. Now, I was lucky, and the reason why I got it so cheap was that the person was close by to me, about 20 miles. When you're doing cash on collection for these type of things, there's going to be a smaller radius of people in that area that are obviously looking for an A1 printer. I was probably the only one in that radius of 20 miles who probably wanted to go and pick up a 10-year-old A1 printer. And that's why I managed to get it for so cheap. I did check, and I did make sure that they had used it. They assured me that they used it probably about a month before it was being sold. And I also got them to print off a nozzle check for me. Now, it's really, really important that you try to get a nozzle check, or you get some sort of proof that it is actually printing and working fine. Good thing about these printers is that you can use bulk ink. Now, I did a video earlier on the channel about how I save lots of money by using bulk ink on my other Canon A3 printer. So as soon as I bought this printer, I knew that I was going to be using a lot of the black inks in the printer. So I purchased a few bottles of matte black and the normal black inks. Another good thing about this printer is that it only has 5 colours. So that means that there's less ink to buy. You can convert it to an all black system. I mostly have used this printer for printing film positives. But I've also been experimenting with printing some of my pictures, and the results have actually been pretty good. I've had this printer for a little over 6 months now, and so far I've had no problems with it. Luckily, it's printed fine. The day that I got it, I did some test prints, did some nozzle check prints, and it was all working okay. I left it for about 2 months while I was away on a trip, and when I come back, started printing again, didn't have any problems. It just went through a automatic cleaning cycle a few times. Usually when you don't print it for a week or two, when you start it up, it will go through a cleaning cycle. But apart from that, it's been really, really fun to use. From my experience, I'm pretty confident that I could leave it for a long amount of time. I mean, I've done it for 2 months. Haven't had any problems, but do remember that the Canons aren't completely insusceptible to blockages. I do try to run a print through it every single 1 or 2 weeks just to keep the ink flowing, and you should try and use it as much as possible really, because that will definitely help to reduce any sort of blockages that you might come across. Straight out of the printer, the positives are pretty good. I think the standard settings will be good enough for most basic graphics. But if you're doing halftone work or any sort of fine detail like what I've got in the background here, then there are some settings that you can tweak in Photoshop to make sure that you get the densest blacks possible. So I'm going to show you the settings that I use. Now I'm going to show you some positives and show you the comparison of what these settings actually do. In Photoshop, if you go to File, Print, it will bring up the print settings. These settings I always see get mentioned on how to get the darkest blacks. And that is to obviously set the media type to a heavyweight photo paper. This obviously makes sense because you're telling the printer that the paper can handle more ink on it. So it will deposit more ink, which will obviously give you a more opaque black. So that is the first thing you want to make sure you do. I always set it to heavyweight glossy. You want to set print quality to the highest. That will obviously tell it to deposit as much ink as possible. Now, something I never see mentioned, and this really does make a big difference because I'm going to show you the positives afterwards, is you can go into the actual color settings. Here you can adjust the color, and what you can do is you can just set everything to high, And if you set this, and if you set the brightness to dark, if you set the contrast to high, you set the saturation to high, you're essentially telling it to just make the image much more punchy, and therefore it will deposit more black. So if you click on OK, and then you go through the regular steps of printing it, and now I'm going to show you the results. So these two squares were printed with exactly the same settings when it comes to the paper stock and also setting it to print the highest quality. The only difference is that the square on the left has the color settings changed to max, what I just showed you, and then the one on the right is just it set to the default color settings. So you can really see the difference that this makes. Using these settings will give you nice dense blacks, but it won't be completely opaque. If you're looking for completely opaque, then you would probably want to use maybe an all black system, and that is where the ink cartridges are swapped out. So every single one is black and it just prints all of the cartridges. So you essentially get 6 layers of black being applied. There are a few other things that you can do. You can print the positive twice and just double up on it. This is much easier if you have a basic design, or you can actually put the positive through the printer again and just print on top of it. So you don't use 2 sheets of acetate, you're just using 1 sheet. And you can see that the square on the left is exactly that. I printed it once, put it back in at the same orientation, and I printed it again, and that left square is essentially 2 layers of print of the max color settings. And you can see the square on the right, that is with just the max color settings and just printed once. So it really does make a big difference doing the print twice. I mean, it is nearly completely opaque, but that square on the right, that is dense enough to expose halftones. So I haven't had really any need to actually double up on the positives. So if you're looking for a cheap A1 printer for your screen printing setup, I'd definitely recommend the IPF605. There's also the IPF670, which is a slightly better version, but it's also quite old and you see quite a lot of them on eBay. They go for a little bit more money. Honestly, I think the 605 is more than enough for a screen printing setup for printing A1. So hopefully that's been helpful. If you've got any questions, as always, just put them in the comments below. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you all later.